Hey, good morning, everyone. Merci beaucoup. C'est un plaisir d'être ici avec vous. So very happy to be here. I've been here before, but Ali, a huge thank you. Thank you for your leadership and bringing everyone together. I mean, it is great, that I'm presenting for 20 minutes, but what I always enjoy most about this event is all the conversations that we have outside of this as well with all the fantastic folks that are here. So very happy to engage with all of you. So just a little bit about the Cyber Center, for those that may not know. So the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, created in 2018, brought together a few different elements of the Government of Canada. I'll go into those, but really we're part of CSE, the Communication Security Establishment. History of CSE goes back to World War II. Born out of World War II is code making and code breaking. So mathematicians trying to decipher German signals at that point in time, but also protect Canadian and Allied communications. So really a lot of math, a lot of crypt. Built on top of that was information assurance, and then built on top of that was signals intelligence, finding out what was going on around the world and bringing it back into Canada for national security purposes. So in 2018, the Cyber Center was created. So the mandate of the Cyber Center was really the technical authority for cybersecurity and information assurance. Information assurance to us means a variety of different things, mainly crypt. The cryptographic mission is near and dear to our hearts, and it underpins cybersecurity, certainly. And I think that's becoming more and more evident as we move forward into a different era where we're seeing the importance of crypt maybe being forgotten at times, and I'll get into some of that. Also, of course, advice, guidance, services for the Government of Canada, very important to the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. We're the CSIRT, or the Cybersecurity Incident Response Team for Canada. This is critical infrastructure. This was a new mandate that was actually brought on to the Cyber Center in 2019. So our responsibility grew from just the Government of Canada or the federal government to provinces, territories, critical infrastructure, anything that's a system of importance to the Government of Canada, which is pretty much all the sectors of critical infrastructure in Canada. One of the new legislative mandates that we got is CSE. So you have signals intelligence, you have the Cyber Center, which is the technical authority for cybersecurity, was foreign and defensive cyber operations. That was created in the CSE Act in 2019. And thought I would mention it fits kind of between signals intelligence and cyber defense. And that's really, taking action in foreign space. So CSE is legally authorized to actually take action in foreign space when authorized by the appropriate ministers and in alignment with Canadian priorities. So we do that. And I just wanted to flag that. One example of this would be that we have flagged in our annual report. Incident happened in Canada on critical infrastructure. Cyber Center goes in to actually help with the incident response. It was a significant incident. During that incident response, we find out information and technical indicators regarding the threat actor that actually committed the intrusion. We share that with signals intelligence. Signals intelligence goes out to the rest of the world, finds out all they can about this threat actor, sucks back all actionable intelligence that we need. When that was exhausted in this case, then that information was passed on to foreign cyber operations that actually went and disrupted this threat actor so they could no longer take action anywhere in the world. So that's how the mandates work together. They are complementary pieces to our mandate. And it's actually complementary from an educational perspective as well, with people flowing back and forth across the mandates, but it is how we work within CSE. Just a few things in terms of numbers from our annual report. I noticed some of the metrics are a little off here, but 2,500 incidents we looked at. So we're always busy within the Cyber Center. About 1,100 of those are on the federal government. 1,400 of those were voluntarily reported to us as a Cyber Center. So we're busy every single day. Every weekend, 24/7, incidents are happening. We are learning of incidents from critical infrastructure nonstop. We are learning about incidents from what we're monitoring on the Government of Canada that I'll get into a bit after this. And then what we do is we take this information, we anonymize it, and then share it back through our threat intelligence feeds. We embed that whatever we've learned into our advice and guidance. We take that as data that we use for our threat assessments, and we use that basically to help the Canadian population in a variety of different ways. A couple of numbers I'll just flag there. Pre-ransomware notifications. Sometimes we get, from either intelligence or analytic means, we actually understand that an organization has been compromised by, say, the first stage of ransomware. Happens fairly often. I mean, we put out over 300 of these. This is always a race, so almost one every day, I would say, in terms of the numbers. But this is a race for us to actually notify the organization, so the victim, and tell them, by the way, you have been compromised and you're on the verge of being ransomware. So this is very important to us to actually get these pre-notifications out. We also share several hundred more with the US on a regular basis as well, and our partners share these with us as well. So just one of the examples of some of the efforts that we have. In 2018, when the Cyber Center was created, we thought it was important for us to reach out to the rest of Canadians and give them an understanding as to who we were. We wanted to do a report, but we didn't want it to be a retrospective saying, hey, this is what's happened in the past. So it's really a future-looking prediction as to what we thought the threat environment was going to be for the next couple of years. This is a scientific methodology, so there's assessment judgments that actually get weighed and made and measured. We've been doing this every 2 years since 2018, and you can look back at our judgments for the past 4 or 5 reports that we've put out, and you can see that pretty much what's been in there has been incredibly accurate in terms of our predictions for the next couple of years. So the last one we put out was last October, so we're almost getting up to the annual anniversary. Several key judgments in there, and I'll just go over a few. I won't go into all of them, but if you haven't read it, it's a good read and certainly is relevant to even today, but it's good for another couple of years. Really, when we're looking at threat actors, we're looking at a few different categories, but the 3 that I'll highlight are, nation states, they're fairly advanced and sophisticated. They're following, government intelligence priorities, national security, geopolitical priorities. We have cyber criminals motivated by money, becoming more and more sophisticated, a whole ecosystem that supports them. And then somewhere between nation states and cyber criminals, there's kind of proxies of government, ideologically motivated. These are a little more worrisome to us in some ways because you don't really understand whether they're going to be following the same red lines the nation states will or not. But at the same point in time, there are some linkages between states and some of these groups. I'll just go into a little bit on some of them. In terms of the first bullet there, in terms of nation states seeking to disrupt and divide us, divide is really misinformation. I mean, this has become commonplace today. There's no shortage of misinformation, and that's going to increasingly grow. It is a threat to democracy. We put out our Threats to Democratic Processes document since 2017. We're one of the world leaders in actually flagging that to the world as we saw some democratic principles starting to crumble for different means, and wanted to basically highlight the link between cyber activity and some of the threats to democratic processes. Won't go into misinformation too much here. Talk more a little bit about the disrupt. Over the years, we've seen nation-state activities go from collection of intellectual property, certainly a big problem 10, 15 years ago, has continued on. Then it was just bulk data collection for a number of reasons to fulfill pretty much any intelligence priorities that are out there. But more recently, we've seen the Volt Typhoons and some of these other actors that are talked about by industry. This was pre-positioning on critical infrastructure where there's no actual intelligence gain. So what is the rationale for actually pre-positioning there? That's really to disrupt critical infrastructure. So that's something that we are very concerned about. Certainly, it does impact Canada, and this is why we need to work closer and closer with critical infrastructure as we move forward. Cybercrime, I'll talk a little bit about. There was a time when cyber criminals had to actually develop their own tools, figure out how to compromise organizations, move through and figure out how to extort money for their own gain. That's all changed. I mean, really what's happened over the years with ransomware and the evolution of some of these cyber criminal activities, and then the ransoms that have been paid in digital currency like Bitcoin, is that so much money has flowed into the ecosystem that this is actually like a thriving dark web ecosystem now. Really, all you need to be is a criminally minded business person who wants to take advantage of cyber means. You can go to the dark web and get access to organizations, get tools for exploitation, get money laundering services, mixers that'll actually obfuscate and launder your digital currency or the proceeds of your financial crimes. And certainly it's a thriving ecosystem. There's been some, excellent law enforcement efforts to disrupt this ecosystem, but it's really proven to be incredibly resilient, breaks up, reconstitutes itself, and continues to exist. So certainly what we're predicting for the next couple of years is that this will continue to thrive despite the best efforts of law enforcement and cyber defenders. And the last bullet I'll say there is about those groups that are somewhere between states and nation states. Nation states and cyber criminals. These are ideologically motivated groups. We'll see their impact in Canada for groups like, Killnet, No Name 0517. You always think that they're working, basically for ideological means. We'll see that sometimes if Canada voices support for Ukraine, websites like the Prime Minister's website, ports across Canada get DDoSed by some of these groups, and certainly we have to track them and understand their intentions. Also, other threats that are actually more in that disruption space that we've certainly seen as well in terms of interfering with critical infrastructure. So something certainly for us to track. We've also highlighted some trends within our National Cyber Threat Assessment that are important in terms of shaping the future. And I'm going to talk a bit about them. Artificial intelligence is one that we flagged for a few reports, including Gen AI. It's certainly changing our ecosystem, but I'm going to talk about both the opportunities and the threats to AI. So we'll skip over that one. Changes in cyber threat activity. I do have an example I'm going to show. Certainly different means of obfuscating efforts. We've seen the advent of huge anonymization networks for cyber criminals and nation states to hide their tracks. We've seen the usage of things called living off the land, where threat actors will actually use tools that are actually just native to an operating system or a system, so that they can actually find specific pieces of malware that can identify them or detect their activity. We also see an exploitation of non-standard sorts of devices like edge devices, telecom appliances, these sorts of things to actually, assist in exploitation that we've seen with groups like Salt Typhoon as well in the news. So many different techniques that are evolving in our current state of evolution. I think I talked a little bit about geopolitically inspired actors. Vendor concentration, definitely a huge deal. We all rely on a handful of different tech in the end, and certainly that creates a kind of a host of cards in some ways in terms of what we're really depending on and understanding what those real dependencies are that we need and how we're securing them. And one of the things that was mentioned earlier in terms of defense spending and dual use technologies, these are technologies that are both military and civilian. We saw with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, one of the first things that were attacked was a satellite modem system. Yes, that had relevance to the war or to the invasion, but it also took out 7 or 8 other European nations' communication systems that were dependent on this system as well. We'll see that with satellite communications, we'll see that with cloud communications, and increasingly, these dual-use technologies are growing and growing, particularly with the advent of increased military spending and military technology. So I'll go a little bit into AI, and what I wanted to talk about was a program I've never really talked about here, but it's our cyber defense program of the Government of Canada. It started about 15 years ago in terms of monitoring government systems. This is one where we actually look at network traffic, we look at endpoint traffic, we look at cloud telemetry. We've done a few new things in there as well, but we are the Security Operations Center for the Government of Canada. So we're monitoring right now. We have endpoint agents on over 900,000 different devices of different types. Network traffic for very close to the whole Government of Canada, all the cloud tenancies, all of this data comes together. And we've been doing this for a long time. I would say that 2014, 2015 is where our ecosystem was established. This was later called XDR, 2018 by Palo Alto, but this is something that we had done in the classified space and later declassified as we actually became more public about some of the things that we did in this space. So it's become more and more relevant just because it's a big data system. It set us up very well for leveraging AI, but it's something that pretty much everyone around the world is doing nowadays. So when you look at our cyber defense ecosystem, we've always found, and we've been doing this, like I said, for 15 years now, it's impossible to detect certain types of threats unless you have multiple sources of telemetry. From our perspective, it's always important to have network traffic that we've had for a very long time. We added our endpoint traffic really because encryption was coming in 2010, 2011. We said, hey, this encryption is going to interfere with traditional network traffic, so we need endpoint monitoring. Very important. I think it was very important that we actually built up that program. Cloud came in, so we introduced cloud-based sensors around 2018. It's in the cloud guardrails for the Government of Canada that every government department that gets a cloud tenancy has to subscribe to our services. So getting all of this data together really forms the basis of effective detection and monitoring of cyber threats. You mix in cyber threat intelligence that we have on the classified side, but also from multiple commercial feeds and various other forms, that becomes a pretty good ecosystem for detecting threats. The last thing that we've added that's quite interesting, I'm only going to go into a few elements of it because it will become a national framework. But as threats evolve, it's become more and more difficult to actually just find them through traditional means, even when you're looking at an advanced system like an XDR ecosystem. And that's why we've gone to integrating deception information in there as well. This is a combination of deception sensors and tripwires. Certainly, it's a kind of an asymmetric response to what threat actors are doing. But with the advent of AI, what we have seen is that, people are saying, like, how do you know if people are leveraging AI? How are they leveraging AI? It's certainly a question that we get all the time. You see that certainly in the crafting of, social engineering, emails, these sorts of things. Can't necessarily say that, we have AI-generated threats on an ongoing basis, but what we have seen is the ridiculous volume of threats that we see on a daily basis. As we're monitoring the Government of Canada, we're blocking billions of things every day in an automated fashion. But even with those ridiculous numbers, we're still seeing the efforts of threat actors scaled to a level that we've never seen before. So certainly the automation has grown, whether it's AI fueling it or not, means that we're going to have to do something different in terms of our response. It's only so much you can do automatically with the technologies that we have today. Just a quick look at, structuring data. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of, whatever you're pretty much doing nowadays, if you're going to be enabling it with AI, it's really understanding your data governance, getting your data in a clean way. If you want to use agentic AI, well, it's only as good as the data you're putting in. It has to be clean. It has to be scrubbed. You have to deduplicate entries. You have to normalize your data. And then if you want it to be real time, it has to be a super efficient data pipeline. This is what we've had for years within our organization. So it's been, I think, positioned us well for layering agentic AI on top of that. We have about 8 different use cases now that we're pushing forward with different agent-based types of cyber defense, all in prototype stage. But what we have embedded throughout is steps where the agent will do something, pop up a bubble that says approve, and then a human will actually have to go and approve the next step and then move on to the next step. So very important to embed your governance around it, not just from a governance of overall projects of AI within your organization, but also in terms of how you actually operate any sort of agentic system within your environment. And in terms of just the threat of AI, certainly I talked about social engineering. That's going to definitely drastically change on an ongoing basis. I talked about spear phishing emails, those that are written in different languages, those that are actually tailored to the local dialects and these sorts of things. We have seen definitely a change in the quality of those. What we have seen is spoofing of high-ranking individuals, not just within government, but across industry as well and across multiple countries. Actually, with the NC3, we put out a joint publication warning organizations of this. It's impacted not just government, as I mentioned, but a variety of sectors, including finance and telecom. Definitely, the one thing that I would say is that in order to counter where we're seeing AI, which I mentioned is definitely seeing the volumes and the increase in terms of what threat actors are able to do, is we are going to have to leverage AI. We are certainly baking it into everything that we're doing within the Cyber Center. We'll see where that goes. But definitely, while you're actually building your AI systems, what you really have to be doing is considering security right from the utmost. What we certainly have seen around the world, I mean, I was a software engineer in the 90s building the internet at the time, right? New protocols were coming out. There was billions of dollars flowing into the ecosystem. Everyone was, looking to build terabit routers, even there wasn't a terabit of information yet to transfer on the internet. It feels a lot like that today, right? In terms of now it's hundreds of billions of dollars flowing into AI. Everyone is building new things. At the same point in time, we looked at what was built during that period of the late 90s, earlier 90s. Protocols came out. We still look at protocols like BGP, right? There's no origin validation. There's no authentication. Well, that wouldn't happen anymore because we understand how to build protocols. Well, not true, right? So when you look at AI, we're installing these things called MCP servers, like model context protocol. This allows your AI agent go discover, data sources and other sorts of tools they can leverage, kind of like API discovery or a DNS for AI. If you look at how it was actually put out by Anthropic originally, no cryptographic validation, no authentication, no encryption, so many loopholes to be exploited. But meanwhile, you're going to trust your agents to actually go out and leverage this. I mean, it wasn't meant to be a secure protocol. It was meant to be functional. But immediately when something works, it gets adopted. And before you know it, it's all over the place. And that's where we are today. So we are repeating some of the mistakes of the past. And these are certainly creating huge opportunities for threat actors. And then one of the things that I had on the threat assessment was that the threat surface is growing. It is growing, and it's growing very, very quickly. So not just in the AI space, but in the IoT, the OT space, the IT-OT convergence. So with the threat surface growing faster than defenses are growing, we have to find ways to actually shrink that gap. And that has not yet happened. Maybe just one quick example of something that's happened recently. So this is within the last few weeks. I think that people lived the SharePoint exploitation. I just thought I'd give some relevancy as to what we live on a regular basis. So it's often that a vulnerability will come out and a significant vendor or significant piece of software that the world depends on. It takes almost no time for that to be exploited. In this case here, it was being exploited before knowledge of the vulnerability was even out as that happened. It was actually dated a few weeks before the vulnerability came out. But from a Cyber Center perspective, just to give you some context as to what we do, as soon as we found out about it, we did our analytics. We looked to see if there was exploitation happening in Canada. That night, our CSERT stayed up, 24 hours. We were sending out notifications. I think we sent out 161 notifications, not to vulnerable servers within Canada, but to vulnerable servers that are actually actively being exploited. So that's the work that we do. We got responses from many of these groups to actually confirming the exploitation. Some were actually compromised from this case, so pretty serious to say. But one thing that I would point out is that, you know, if you read the Microsoft blog, it's kind of interesting. They talk about the things to look at. This is certainly what we had built into our analytics. They talked about a web shell called spin install being installed that you should look for. Within the first day, we found exploitation that was very different from that. So we are writing a blog, but instead of using living off the land and some of the techniques that were talked about, we found dozens of handcrafted Microsoft.NET plugins that were used to do those stages that I actually have listed on the screen. Every one of those was actually enabled by one of these plugins, unknown by any kind of antivirus or security vendor. So we've added them. We've updated some detections in our tool called Assembly Line that is open sourced and used by thousands of companies around the world. So we've added those. We've tried to write a blog and publish it, but it takes a bit of time for government. But we have shared a lot of this information with the security vendors that are certainly responding to this. But just interesting to see that, you know, with the effort that we saw that went into this, these are all memory-based plugins as well, so not easily detected. Haven't seen this in any blog yet, but at the same point in time, with all the money that we're throwing into it, with all the different threat intelligence companies that are out there and all the response firms, you still find something that's incredibly different from what you're seeing out there. And in this case, almost the opposite, right? Because they're talking about, you know, this one web shell followed by living off the land. What we see is kind of the handcrafted, highly engineered plugin after plugin after plugin with features like SMB, which is for lateral movement or privilege escalation. This takes a lot of engineering effort. And the fact that it's just happening on one box in Canada is not the case. We found it on one box in Canada. It means it's out there. So it will be interesting to see where that actually goes. But these are some of the sorts of things that we do at the Cyber Center. And the last technology I will talk about, I don't know how I'm doing for time, but I think I'm still all right. Quantum computing, right? So this is something that you're hearing. Quantum computers are here. They're still growing in power and efficiency and computational strength. What we're worried about from a cybersecurity perspective is when a cryptographically relevant quantum computer gets built. That's because cryptographic algorithms are based on really hard math problems that take a very long time to solve. So if you're going to protect your data, you know that they're going to be protected for decades because nothing can actually break that crypt for a long time. So the problem with quantum computers is they can run different kinds of algorithms, like Shor's algorithm, that can actually open up some of these asymmetric algorithms that we use for key exchange. And the problem there is that I have listed it there. It's really the store now, decrypt later problem. So if you're actually transiting or storing data or exposing data that you've got encrypted that you think is quite sensitive, the idea is that a threat actor could actually collect this data, wait for 5-10 years for a quantum computer that's sufficiently powerful to come along, and then open it all up. So you have to think of the longevity of your data, the sensitivity of your data, and what you need to do to protect it. So that's really the risk that is out there and exposed to every critical infrastructure provider or government. So what we've done at the Cyber Center is we've put out basically our quantum transition guidelines. We put these out in June, talking about pretty much that now is the time to plan. So make your plan. We're asking Government of Canada to have their plan in place by April, and then revise the plan each year. After that, it's really build a cryptographic inventory. You don't know exactly which of your crypts are vulnerable and when you're going to have to replace them, but understanding what crypt is out there is really important. That allows you to actually prioritize expenditure and what equipment needs to be replaced. And then continue to iterate that plan. And what we said is there's an earlier date for the things that you find really critical and a later date for those that you find less critical. So you tier your equipment so you can actually replace it at a reasonable date, which is really the only manageable way of going through that transition. So that document's on our website. And maybe the last thing I'll mention then, I think I'm getting down to the last 3 minutes here, so I'll just talk a little bit about partnerships that was mentioned. We talked a little bit about the National Cybersecurity Strategy that came out. I think Colin will probably be speaking about some of this, but the importance of partnership, and everyone in this room, is that, you know, cybersecurity is a team sport. We stood up the Canadian Cyber Defense Collective with a group of the security service providers in Canada. We all share threat intelligence. Amazing collaboration in that space, and that kind of extends out to different areas of critical infrastructure. So that stood up operating and has helped us to really inform thousands of critical infrastructure providers of threats across Canada. And then just in summary, A few different things, but security by design was mentioned earlier, but that's more and more important as we go forward. Security has to be a consideration in absolutely everything we do. We see it being left behind once again, even as we'd like go to implement AI and newer technologies in this space. Has to be baked in right from the start in terms of that ship left, and that's pretty much all the resiliency that you can possibly bake in. It's becoming harder and harder to detect and respond to threats in a meaningful time, given how fast they're going. I talked about what's old is new again as well. Some of the mistakes of the past, understanding what we've seen vulnerable, not baking those into standards. The standardization of these things takes time. With all the money flowing into technologies like AI, we know it's going to way outpace the security, and that's going to leave us vulnerable in many, many different ways. But why can't we prioritize that in our expenditures and our procurements, in our different contracts that we negotiate with organizations? There has to be a different market incentive to make sure that security gets baked in and we don't relive the mistakes of the past. And that the last point there is really the continual evolution. Every day you read about a new type of exploitation that's happening. We are in a very changing landscape, particularly because of AI at this point in time, with new threats, and whatever you're doing has to be revisited on an ongoing basis. You saw us introducing deception into our arsenal of tools. Well, that's just part of it. There's more and more things that we're going to have to actually bake in to make sure we can contend with the threats. But it's a very interesting landscape. It'll take all of us to solve it. So really happy to be part of this today and appreciate the time I've had to talk to you, and very happy to chat afterwards. So thank you very much.